Good afternoon. I am Mahlaka, and I am with the Daily Maverick. Thanks, Ian, for joining us. Good afternoon.
Hi.
Welcome all to this webinar where we will be discussing this book. I'm not sure if you can see it. It's Ian's book. It's called Cultureneering, Culture, Diversity, and Customer Service. And Ian, who joins us this afternoon, is the author of that book. Now, Ian has done many things in his career, over 40 years as an entrepreneur. He is best known as the founder of a beauty salon group called Sorbet. He sold that business in 2017. And these days, Ian is busy with business and personal leadership coaching through a company he founded called the Hatch Institute. Ian is passionate about creating a new breed of leaders that are culture-driven, place the needs and well-being of people above profits, and have the moral authority to lead. He also wants to stem the tide of systemic racism that continues to undermine South African businesses, preventing them from building a truly inclusive economy. And this is what Ian's book is all about. A couple of housekeeping stuff before we start the discussion with Ian. Thanks to Workshop 17 for supporting Daily Maverick webinars and for making today's discussion possible. Workshop 17 has 3 locations in Joburg and 3 locations in Cape Town. And Workshop 17 will be happy to show you around. And if you mention Daily Maverick, there's a free coffee on them. So, and about Ian's book, you will be able to purchase a copy of the book directly from the Daily Maverick shop during this webinar. So let's get into the discussion and let's make it as possible. So you're welcome to fire your questions through to Ian. I will ask him those questions. But yeah, let's have an engaging discussion. Before we went live, I was telling Ian that I think he's gone full circle in his career because back in 1991, just as South Africa was about to embrace a democracy, he founded a labor relations consultancy company called Labor Think, and he advised businesses on building a racially inclusive and friendly workplace environment. And Ian left this company at around 1997. And Ian, you're now back at this line of work through the Hatch Institute. Why come back to this line of work and function more than 20 years later?
Right. I think it is pretty much unfinished business, Ray. I started that business called Labor Link in 91 because I had just come out of my previous company called Supermart, which was originally KMart. And I had learned a lot about dealing with racial polarization in the workplace, and which helped me to change the way that I thought about business, the way I thought about leadership. And I tried a whole lot of things and they seemed to work well. So I decided to go out into the big wide world and see if I could start consulting to public companies. At first they thought I was a bit crazy because I had no academic background. I had very little experience in their eyes. So it took me a while, and I eventually started some theater, industrial theater, which got me into these companies. And I started working on racial polarization and trying to help companies how to deal with racism in the workplace. And after all these years now, it's almost 30 years since I was doing that, I can now kind of go back and conclude my unfinished business, because I never really felt that I finished everything I wanted to do. And of course, the issues that I had in the early 90s in terms of race relations are still prevalent right now in South Africa. They haven't gone away. In fact, in some cases, they're even worse. So still lots of work to be done here in this regard.
Yeah. I mean, you said unfinished business twice, and that to
Yes.
me indicates that there's a sense of urgency in the work that you're doing right now. Coming back, is it a function of maybe there is a leadership problem, that workplaces are not inclusive enough from a racial, gender, religion, and other perspectives? Do we have a problem in creating a culture of inclusiveness, a culture of diversity? Is that what you're referring to here?
So leadership is really the problem from that point of view. If you look at what we have today, we have a highly complex and volatile socio-political environment. And the leaders need to understand that what goes on outside of the organization impacts people inside and also impacts on the culture inside the business. So leadership needs to be a lot more than it used to be. It's not just about making money anymore and productivity and getting people to do what you want them to do. It's now about understanding the complexities of people's lives in this highly volatile environment. So culture-driven leadership means that you have to now earn the moral authority to lead. You can't just go anymore and be a leader just because you're at the top of the structure and you have the power to make decisions and to tell people what to do. Now you have to earn that right. You have to earn the right for people to trust and respect you, and that they feel that you're genuinely concerned about their well-being as human beings, and that you have created a place of safety where people can speak freely without fear. All of these things are really important now. So leadership styles have changed dramatically. And culture-driven leadership also includes servant leadership as well, which is about serving the people who are serving the people.
Yeah, and I know you look at mostly businesses in your book, Ian. We're seeing with the local government election and the very polarizing results and people staying away from voting, in fact, which is quite worrying. Yeah. I mean, do you think that's a direct result of the lack of servant leadership beyond just business as well, and government as well? Are we starting to see that play out in elections maybe as well?
Yes, absolutely, Ray. You know, if you look at the situation with the results of the election, there was obviously an overwhelming sense of hopelessness. A lot of people didn't vote because they really didn't believe that their vote was going to make any difference. Nothing was going to change. And we have to look at that and say, well, we can't change a government in terms of business, but what we can do is we can change things within our own sphere of influence. We can start making a difference. And business in South Africa today can no longer be just about the short-term financial objectives. We now have to realize that it's our responsibility in business to help uplift this country. It's just as important to build the country right now as it is to build our businesses. Because if we can't build the country, if we can't lift people up, if we can't do the right things and make the compromises that are required and to carry out Black economic empowerment the way it should be carried out, et cetera, if we can't do that, we're never going to be able to change this mindset of hopelessness and to create a country where there's equal opportunities for everyone and everybody can participate in the economy and make a sustainable living. That's what we need to be doing. So leadership now is a much bigger role, a much more holistic role than it used to be in the past. It's about building the country as much as it is about building the businesses.
We have just over 120 people in this discussion. Hello, Harold. Harold says Ian's book is a revelation of sane thinking and the only way forward to build a successful South Africa. So quite a big compliment there. Hello, Nick. Hello, Lisa, Billy, Sasha, Jan, and everybody joining us today. Now, someone might argue, Ian, that, you know, business is about creating profits, maximizing profits, appeasing shareholders, reducing costs. That's the primary objective of business, someone might argue. Yes. The secondary objective would be to build a strong culture and a diverse, you know, workforce that lays the platform for good customer service. That culture is a fuzzy, warm feeling. The primary objective is to create profits. I think you disagree with this approach, eh?
I completely disagree with that approach, right? So basically, what I'm saying is that you need to understand the purpose of business. Why are you in business in the first place? And that's always to serve your customers. It's never to make money. If you're going to business to make money, it's not going to work because your service is not going to be up to the standard that is required. You're going to cut corners, you're going to save costs, you're going to do whatever you can to squeeze extra profit out of the business rather than to go out there and serve your customers to the very best of your ability. And then from that, the money will always follow. So it's really important that we understand that service always comes before reward, not only from a business perspective, but from an employee perspective as well. Most people think they come to work to make money, to earn a salary, to earn a living, but that's not true. They come to work to serve the needs and wants of their customers. And if they do that well, they'll make a good living. And that really is important. So the golden rule of business must always be that service and people should always be put before profit and reward. Service before reward is the golden rule.
And service before reward, is that one of the tenets of a great culture? I guess what I'm asking is, what makes a great culture? Because every business has a culture. It can be empowering, it can be incredibly toxic, it can be inclusive and collaborative. So I guess what makes a great culture in your book?
Right. I think the most important thing about culture is to have or to create a sense of belonging. Every person in the organization, regardless of their differences, their backgrounds, their race, their religion, their culture, whatever their political views, everyone must have a sense of belonging. A sense that I feel trusted and respected in the company. I feel that my contributions are valued. I feel that I'm treated with fairness and dignity and equality. And once you have that and people have that sense of belonging, you can then start to create a culture of common purpose. That common purpose is always to serve. If we can get everybody in the company all coming to work, with the idea of service being top of mind, then we can create a business where we can then go out, serve our customers to the best of our ability, and the rewards will always follow. So that sense of belonging is important. And part of the sense of belonging is to create and to build a strong community and understand the differences that exist. What tends to happen in South Africa these days is most managers will say, why don't we just put the past behind us and just move on and forget about all the trouble, I wasn't there during apartheid. Don't blame me for the sins of my fathers. But unfortunately, that is a bit of a naive, if not sort of irresponsible approach. We do need to understand the impact of our 300-year history of systemic racism and polarization and discrimination and mind manipulation, in which there was a strong degree of white superiority and black inferiority, which really manipulated people's minds and made people feel inferior and some people feel superior. And those things just have an impact on people's lives, and they still do, believe it or not. People say, well, it's part of our history, why don't we just put it behind us? But we can't. We need to have the uncomfortable conversations in business about why the differences exist. Some people talk about shared values. Why don't we just find the shared values? And I think that just puts a bit of a smile on my face. And I say, no, shared values is very nice, but you're sweeping all the other stuff under the carpet. We first need to deal with our differences. Everybody has a book of rules that they have grown up with. Each individual, from a very early stage, starts to develop their paradigms, their thinking, their beliefs. Starts off with your parents, and then at school, and then your social environment, etc., etc. And I call that your book of rules. And everybody has to have a book of rules, and they come with very different books of rules. So, the book of rules of a white manager is very, very different to the book of rules of a black employee. And so once we understand that and we start to learn about each other's books of rules, it makes communication so much easier, so much easier.
Because that's what you demonstrate in the book, Ian. You talk about South Africa's, quite harsh racial history. And I'm glad you addressed that point because every time you talk about race, the retort is always, let's move on. We live in a democracy. Let's look forward and not back. But the reality is, race permeates through everything, through access to opportunity still. Currently, I'm glad you addressed that particular point. But in the book, and sticking to race, Ian, in the book, you reflect about your own life. Growing up Jewish, you talk about benefiting from white privilege, and in a way you were shielded from the harsh realities of apartheid South Africa. And if memory serves, you became more aware of the racial injustice when you and your brother founded a supermarket chain called KMart back in 1976. Quite a seminal year in South Africa, because that was the Soweto uprisings as well. But Kmart served mostly low-income Black customers, and you had Black workers. Would you say that was a defining moment for you when it came to navigating the complexities of race relations?
Right, absolutely. I think, if I look back at my school days, I was taken to a Jewish school, and the only real problem with going to a Jewish school is that there are only Jews there, and you don't get to meet anyone else. You don't get to interact with people of different religions and cultures, etc. So you live a very protected life, and also with a bit of mind manipulation as well. I mean, I grew up believing that we, the Jews, were the chosen people of God, which is cool. It's nice to know that you were chosen by God. I'm not quite sure how or why, but that's how I grew up. And then by the time I left school, that's what I was thinking. And then I went into the army. And there, for the first time, I met a different group, white, Afrikaans-speaking, English, Christian males, And so what happened was I came into the army thinking I was chosen by God, and I can tell you for sure they didn't think so. And so I learned my first harsh lesson there. And then I realized that there's no such thing as a superior or an inferior group. We're all just different. And the sooner we learn to accept and respect our differences, the better off we will all be. And then from that, I went into the working environment. As you say, my brother came back from America. He saw this business called Kmart there. It was a huge, big departmental discount store. At the time, I had very successfully dropped out of university. And I was a singer, and I was working for Gallo Record Company, and he came to me and said, listen, we're going to open this business and we're going to aim it at the black market. And I said, straight away, which one of us is we? And he said, you're going to open this. And I was 22 years old. I knew nothing about nothing, right? I didn't know about retailing, discounting. I knew nothing about the black market or advertising or anything at all. And so I said what most naive 22-year-old boys would say. I said, sure, let's do this. It sounds like fun. And so off we went, and we started planning the opening of Kmart. And as you say, it was 1976. We were supposed to open it in June 1976. But because of the uprisings, we had to postpone the opening a bit. And we opened it up. And there I was, we didn't know what to do, how to open a business. So what I did was I just cut the prices ridiculously low. And half the country arrived. I mean, people had never seen prices like that in all their lives. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't even understand what gross profit meant. So I was just having fun. But then we had this huge, big turnout. Literally, thousands of people arrived at the opening, and the police thought it was another uprising. So they came with their hippos, the old hippos, and their dogs. And it took us quite a while to convince them that this was actually a store opening and not an uprising. Eventually, they managed to get it all sorted out. And there I was, literally the only white guy with all these black customers and all the black staff. And I was completely and utterly overwhelmed. I was too white and too young and too naive and just a bit stupid. And I didn't really know what to do. So once things had settled down after the opening, I found myself a mentor. His name was Ralph Mamele. And he took me into Soweto. And he took me around and he showed me. He said, okay, if you want to understand what goes on in this country, come and have a look. And so I went with him, and my eyes were opened big time. And I realized that I had been living such an exclusive life and a privileged life. Behind all this, I knew nothing about any of the stuff that was going on, completely ignorant and naive. And so he taught me, he took me around and he showed me, and then I started to open my eyes and I became a lot more politically aware and started to really try and understand the impact of what apartheid was doing to people's lives and how it was affecting them every day. Our staff would come in and they'd be harassed by the police coming into work, going home from work. It was just a nightmare. And he used to tell me that the most important thing for him was freedom. Freedom first, he said, and work second. And that was another big eye-opener for me. And I realized that I had to try and develop a leadership style that took into account the socio-political impact of what was going on in the country, and that I couldn't ignore that. And that really was the beginning of my sort of awakening, if you want to call it that. And from that day on, I've been really fascinated by culture and race relations, and I've done a lot of things to learn as much as I can about that and to try and develop a framework that that's exactly what cultureneering is. It's a framework of a culture that you can create in such a diverse workforce situation.
I mean, Jeremy speaks to this point about about self-reflecting. I think that's also a good starting point if you want to have a culture-driven and purpose-driven leadership style, is to self-reflect. But Jeremy says, "Hi, Ian. Ultimately, leadership is about taking a direction and leading your constituents in that direction. I suspect that great leaders are strongly opinionated, but continually test the waters of opinion of other people. How do great leaders attain and maintain the balance between being overly democratic or overly domineering?" Quite a tough balance, eh?
That's a very fine line that we're talking about there, Jeremy. And that's a fantastic question. Thank you. So if we look at, at leadership, one of the things that we really need to do as leaders is to inspire people. I think that's one of the words that's not used enough in leadership training. We need to inspire people to want to follow us. So once we earn that moral authority to lead, we inspire people, because the great leaders of the world are those that inspire people to follow them to places that they would never have gone by themselves. And that's what leadership is. So to try and find that balance between being a strong leader and also being a servant leader, I would always try and sort of lean towards servant leadership if I can. Because servant leadership is about nurturing, and it's about uplifting, and it's about developing people and building relationships. Whereas the other style of leadership, the old power-driven leadership style, is more about top-down, heavy-handed management, and reprimanding people and firing them and using fear rather than respect and trust. So those are the two kinds of leadership styles. I would strongly recommend the culture-driven leadership style.
And the culture of fear, Ian, a culture of a toxic environment, a culture of fear, what does that result to? Does it impact productivity levels, morale, staff? What does it lead to? Is it helpful or harmful at the end of the day?
Harmful. In fact, very harmful. So if you have a toxic culture, the bottom line is no one's going to be focused on the customer if you are focused on what the problems are inside the business. So we're looking inwards rather than outwards. That's the first big problem. If our purpose of work is to serve our customers, and we come to work, and the first thing that we feel that we don't have a sense of belonging because we are of the wrong race, or we're trying to be assimilated into a dominant culture and we're uncomfortable with that, then who's going to worry about the customer? Nobody. The harsh reality is that we turn our backs on the customers when we're looking inwards into the organization, into a toxic culture where leadership doesn't understand the impact of this lack of sense of belonging.
Gugu is having quite a problem here with, building an inclusive and great culture. Gugu, he or she says, "Afternoon, Ian. I am Gugu, a co-founder of Asana." I hope I'm saying the name of your business correct, Gugu. I'm sorry if I'm not. It's a natural hair salon in Cape Town. My business partner and I are set on building a company where our staff can grow, learn, and aim to look beyond just being hairstylists. But this is difficult if we are not met with eagerness to learn and grow. So what do we need to consider in curating an effective capacity building strategy for our team, getting them motivated and creating an environment where they are eager to learn, Ian?
Right. So the first thing to do is to get people to understand why they come to work in the first place. And so I did all the induction training myself at Sorbet. Every single person that joined the company, over 3,000 of them, came through my induction training, because it was so important to explain to them why they came to work in the first place and what it is that they were doing there. Most people say, as I said earlier, come to work to make money. And so it was my role to convince them that that's not true, that we have to serve our customers and to make them feel good about themselves. That's why they came to beauty salons. That was the real purpose, is to make people feel good. So you need to explain to your staff, Gugu, you need to explain to your staff why they are there in the first place, because they're not there just to make money. Most of them think that. And if you can then convince them that we're actually making a difference in people's lives, we are touching people's lives, especially in the hair industry and the beauty industry, you're making people feel good about themselves. That's why you come to work every day. And that's why they come to you. They don't come to you because they want to sit in a chair for an hour with a thing on top of their head. They come to work because they want to leave there feeling better than when they arrived. And so that means that they feel good, they can go out there, they've got self-confidence, self-esteem, self-worth, and everything is fine. So that's the first thing, is make sure that they understand why they are coming to work and the impact that they have on the lives of the customers. Once you have that, then it's about attitude, the attitude with which you serve your customers. And that was the one thing that I always felt, looking back at Sorbet and what really allowed us to grow into a national chain of 225 franchise stores, was the fact that the attitude of our staff was such that people would keep coming back. That was the key. And because service alone can do half the job, but if you don't deliver service with a good attitude, then that's not right. So the attitude became our competitive advantage. Sometimes I go into a supermarket and I look at the cashiers behind the tills, and they all look miserable, and I go up to them because I don't like it. So I go up to them and say, listen, what's wrong? What's wrong here? They say, what do you mean, what's wrong? I say, well, are you happy? And they say, of course I'm happy. And then I would say, well, if you're happy, tell your face. Let your face know that you're happy, because it's your attitude that's going to bring me back here. Because if you're looking miserable and solemn, then why would I want to be in your presence? So the whole thing about this is, particularly when you're in the service industry, where you're literally touching people's bodies, their hair, their nails, their head, you need to make sure that you're doing it with a fantastic attitude. And that's what builds.
I find your experiences at Sorbet fascinating. I mean, the language you use to describe customers, you don't call them customers, you call them guests.
Right.
And you focused on developing beauty technicians, upskilling them and ensuring that the staff pool at Sorbet reflects the demographics of the country. Because when you started Sorbet, a lot of the beauty technicians are white, I think, if memory serves, you said,
yes.
But now predominantly black. Why were you so deliberate about these things? Calling customers guests, developing people at Sorbet. Why were you so deliberate about those things?
So the language is what differentiated us. So, in the business that we created, we weren't doing anything dramatically different to other beauty salons. We did more or less the same treatments. We sold products that many other salons also sold. So the only thing that could differentiate us was our culture, because you can't copy a culture. You can walk into a salon and you can copy anything. You can copy the display and the product range, and you can copy the menu and the prices and all of that stuff. But you can't copy a culture. So the one thing that differentiated us was the culture. And the other thing was the language, which was part of the culture. So we created our own language to say guests, because we were in the hospitality industry. We weren't in the retail industry. That's how we saw it. We called our staff the citizens of Sorbet. We didn't call them employees or staff. They were citizens. So all of these things became really important in terms of our culture. And in terms of the racial side of our employees, when I started Sorbet, right in the very early days when I was still doing the planning, 2004, I was invited to go to a product company launch. And so I went along there. I was fascinated. I knew nothing about the beauty industry, by the way. I always thought a Brazilian was a person who lived in Brazil at that point. And that Hollywood was a place they made movies, so I knew nothing about knowing until I learned about waxing. So there's some really weird waxes out there, right? I mean, we had
I don't know, Ian.
We called a 3/4 leg wax, and it used to boggle my mind as to which quarter they left out. But nevertheless, so I went into this thing, and I knew very little about the beauty industry, and then I realized that all the people there were white. 2004. So the staff they were white, and the salon owners that were at the function were also all white. So I went to one of the managers of the product company, and I said to them, you know, where are the black people? Was there like a transport problem or a taxi strike or something? Why? What happened to the black people? And she said, no. You know, our product is upmarket and it's mainly bought by white people. And our white customers and clientele prefer to have white therapists working on them than black therapists. And that was a huge shock to me, because I mean, I'd been working with black people all my life. I could not believe what I was hearing. And I said to I didn't make a fuss about it with her, but I said to myself at the time, I said, listen, you know, if I can get Sorbet to work, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change the face of the beauty industry. We need to make sure that the demographics are right. And looking back at it, Ray, at this point in time, I must say that is one of the things of which I'm most proud in terms of what happened at Sorbet.
Yeah.
90 to 95% of all the staff across the country are people of color.
Yeah, I mean, that story is quite shocking that you told us. It's detailed in your book. But were the mistakes, sticking with Sorbet, were the mistakes that were made along the way, did you get it right, you think, at all times?
There's always mistakes and there's always learnings. You know, you're always tweaking and trying to improve. I mean, I went ahead at one point in time and started Sorbet in the UK, which was a big mistake. And turned out to be a disaster. So, you know, you can't actually believe that everything you touch is going to turn to gold. You know, sometimes, quite frankly, it just turns to shit. So basically, you know, I realized that it was my own arrogance that was at fault there. You know, I had to understand that it was me, because I just believed you could take our current model in South Africa and just transport it there and plonk it down in London, and everyone's going to come flying, because in my view, their salons at the time were not great, and they were not, you know, it was like taking candy from a baby, really. You know, this thing seemed so easy, and we failed dismally, and I learned lots of lessons. And you know, failure is also always a massive part of your success, because that's where you do the true learning, is when you fail, for sure. Yeah. And you can't look back at your old success. You know, the only thing you get back from looking at past success is a stiff neck. And so
you know, Ian, you and many South African businesses, we go offshore with that same approach. We're going to replicate what we do in South Africa into offshore markets. But that resulted in about 6 Sorbets closing, I think, in the UK. And you actually let go of about 40 people, if memory serves, in the book. Someone who knows you, I think, personally, a very detailed question. Harold Magid, I hope I'm pronouncing his name.
Harold Magid, yes.
Says, Ian, please tell everyone about the Van der Merwe world title fight in Russia and how to find your true strength. You know Harold?
I know Harold well, and I'm not going to tell this. This is a family show, Harold. Sorry about that.
Okay. so Willie missed it. Willie says, please in short define your version of servant leadership.
Right. Servant leadership really can be defined simply as serving the people who are serving the people. So it means that the leadership is there to serve their employees. In most cases in South Africa, and traditionally, what we find is that the employees come to serve their leaders. And they do that because the leader controls their destiny, and it controls their next salary increase and the next promotion and when they can go on leave, and et cetera, et cetera. So they do a lot of bowing and groveling and scraping in front of the leader to try and please the leader. But when you do that, you're turning your back on the customer. So what we want to do is we want to turn around, face the customer, and rather be served by our leaders rather than serving them and trying to make them happy. So servant leadership really means doing everything in your power to enable your employees to be able to go out there and serve their customers to the very best of their ability. And that means everything from making sure they understand why they come to work, doing all the training and development, doing the encouraging and supporting them, giving them the tools that they need, etc., etc., etc. So it's about serving your people who are serving the people.
Yeah. Tabu Siwedi takes us back to the KMart days. He asks, or she asks, out of curiosity, where exactly was this Kmart located?
Okay, it started off originally in Pritchard Street, Johannesburg, and then it moved to Jeppe Street, and that's where it was for some time until we had to change it to Supermart. Because of the name, we were a bit silly. Not only did we use the name, I didn't know much about trademarks at the time, but we also used their logo as well, which was really dumb. And so 12 years later, they came with their lawyers, like a whole army of lawyers, to come to South Africa to stop us using their name. And because we had been going for 12 years, we thought we had a good case. But then again, we lost hopelessly, and we had to change our name to Supermart. And that was the name. That business we sold, Supermart, was ultimately sold in 2002 to the Edcon Group, and they rebranded it into Jetmart. So if you know Jetmart today, anybody out there, that was originally Kmart, which became Supermart and then became Jetmart.
Goodness, that history there, Ian, is fascinating. But Brian asks a very important questions about, as a leader and managing emotions. Does leadership need to take into account that our emotions often say very different things to our practical or logical decisions? So managing emotions so that they don't cloud your judgment as a leader, how difficult is that?
It is difficult, and it's an excellent question as well. So part of the cultureneering process is the personal development side of leadership. Unfortunately, one of the things that I didn't focus enough on at Sorbet was actually doing life coaching and personal development for all our franchisees. And it's something that I've changed now, and that's an important part of our current process. So what needs to happen is leaders are expected to go out there and transform cultures, transform people, change them, etc., etc. But often they haven't yet demonstrated their own ability to change and transform. And so there's a huge gap there. And we need to start right at the beginning, that people need to understand what are their blockers, what are those emotions that are coming through and impacting on the way that they serve people and the way they lead people. So they need to identify, part of the process is to identify what I call the blockers. And those blockers, for example, are things like ego and fears and guilt and shame and unconscious bias, etc., etc. So we get people to look at themselves and say, what are the things that are standing in my way and how do I overcome them? Because those things are impacting negatively on my growth and those emotions, and so what happens is that we've got these things that are blocking us, and we get into like a comfort zone. And in that comfort zone, we're hiding away from the scrutiny of the outside world. And with us in the comfort zone are all these blockers, our fears and our guilt and our self-doubt is a huge thing. There's self-doubt these days. Everyone has self-doubt, and a lot of people think they're imposters in their jobs because they're not good enough, etc., etc. So we need to get out of the comfort zone. And we need to start the process of changing within ourselves. Change starts with you, always. Change starts with you. You can't go out there and expect other people to change if you haven't demonstrated that yourself. I came across a nice saying the other day, Ray, which said, yesterday I thought I was clever, so I tried to change other people. Today I became wise, so I tried to change myself. So we need to start with ourselves. We need to identify what are the things that we need to change before we go out there and try and assimilate. In South African businesses, assimilation has become a very popular thing, and it's a real problem because that's the last thing we want. Assimilation is when the dominant culture wants other people to be like them. They want to draw everyone else into their culture their way of thinking. And of course, that doesn't work. That just creates resentment and misplacement and a lack of belonging. So we can't do that anymore. We can't go out there and say, you know, I had a situation, for example, where one of the companies I was working with, they had no black managers in their executive group. And I said to them, you know, where are the black people? And they said to me, believe it or not, they said, we can't find any that think like us. And I said, whoa, you've got a big problem, sir. You know, and so if that's what our plan is, to get black people into our organizations and to convert them into whites, honorary whites, well, then we've got a serious problem. Okay, we need to respect these differences and these different book of rules. For example, a white manager might say to a black employee, you know, I'm not a racist. I don't see color. I treat everybody the same. Now that would seem a perfectly harmless kind of comment to make without, there's no ill intention. That person thinks they're saying something that's fine, you know. Unfortunately, you know, from the employee point of view and their book of rules, that is not fine at all. Because the question will be, what do you mean you don't see color? You know?
Well, you don't see me, hey? You don't see me, you don't... Yeah.
You don't see me, you don't recognize me, and you certainly don't recognize my life experience. You know, my whole life has been determined by my color, and you telling me you don't even see it. Okay, so you get two people now that have very, very different points of view, and then you'll say, "Well, how can you tell me that you treat everyone the same? I'm not the same, and I don't want to be the same." So a person thinking like that, perhaps naively so, with no ill intent, can really offend others. So these are the things that we have to have, these uncomfortable conversations where people really need to learn about their life experiences, learn the history of South Africa. That is absolutely critical. So many people, you know, particularly whites, but some black people as well, are not fully familiar with all of the incredible things that were done, you know, in the name of apartheid and separation and inferiority and mind manipulation and et cetera, et cetera. For example, one little thing that I always like to quote is that in the old days, when they started the Bantustans and the homelands, and they created the Natives Land Act, they created all these little countries which they called Bantustans, which belong to the various ethnic groups, you know, the Tswana people, Sesotho, the Zulu, et cetera, et cetera. And so 87% of the land was given to the white people, 13% to people of color. And if you lived in Soweto, you were not actually allowed to be there, but you were there because you were working for the white economy. Right? And you weren't allowed to call yourself a South African. Okay? South African citizenship was stripped from people who were actually living in South Africa and were born in South Africa. They were given citizenship of Maputo, Tswana, or some other strange place. Yeah. And so all of these things, you know, we don't realize the massive impact of that and the Bantu Education Act and what they did, where Fuhr stood up and said, you know, black people will never rise above the level of laborer, so there's no need to teach them maths or science. And so that impacted dramatically on the entire population and removed their ability to compete equally in the economy. And so we can't just dismiss that stuff and say, well, that's our past. You know, young white people come to me and say, I feel that this is very unfair. This is reverse racism. I was not there. I was not, you can't blame me for the sins of my fathers, etc., etc. And I say, yes, I understand it's difficult for you at the moment. And certainly you were not a perpetrator, but you were most definitely a beneficiary. You were a beneficiary of our past, whether you like it or not. And the reaction and the reality of that is that you need to understand that there's going to be some level of compromise required if we're ever going to be able to create a society in which everyone has a proper equal opportunity. And if you look at the looting and the unrest That is just a symbol of this inequality. South Africa's got one of the highest inequality gaps in the world in terms of wealth. So, I think the unemployed people, 70% of the youth are unemployed. People are just getting tired of having nothing. So, I have warned in the past about this unrest, and it's not going to stop unless we do something meaningful to create a society that is more equal for everybody.
And I think I told you before we went live, I think the July unrest is slowly becoming a missed opportunity to learn from that experience and do things differently going forward. We might have another flare up down the line. I hope not, touch wood. But you've done a lot of work, Ian. Your KMart days, you went through extraordinary steps to get to learn about, the lives of your employees, who they live with, where they live with, how long it takes for them to travel between home and work. When it comes to race blind spots, do you think you've done the work, or is the work still ongoing for you as a leader? Can those blind spots still show themselves as well?
Yes, they can. Of course they can. We need to continue that work. We need to keep finding out and inquiring about our people and showing them that we are equally as concerned about their well-being as humans as we are about their employment status and the work that they're doing. So we need to be looking after and inquiring about their health, physical health, psychological health, financial health. Are we showing a genuine concern for the people that are working there? Because that's how we're going to earn the trust and the moral authority to lead, by asking those questions and making sure that people feel that we genuinely are concerned. We also need to create what I call a place of safety in the workplace, where people feel comfortable to speak up without fear. There's always this fear of speaking up because there might be some retaliation or victimization or intimidation or something that's going to happen negatively when you voice your opinion and it's not a popular one. So we have to create that environment. That's part of the ongoing stuff and the blind spots, because we think that we are, that we have created something like that. But when you ask the people, they say, no, I'm afraid I won't go. And people say, I have an open door policy, they'll say, which is really funny because people are not worried about your door. They're worried about your mind, If the door's open, it doesn't mean your mind is open. So you need to demonstrate an open mind rather than an open door. But just asking your people questions. I always say to leaders, go and ask the people that are reporting into you 5 questions, right? Have I earned your trust and respect? Do I show genuine concern for you as a human being, right? Have I shown a commitment to your development and your growth, right? Have I created an environment where you can have a sense of belonging and common purpose? And have I created a place of safety where you feel free to speak without fear? Those are the 5 things. Ask them the questions, get the direct feedback. If they don't give you honest feedback, well, then you've got more work to do because they don't trust you.
And also, those questions are also a reflection of you as a leader. Have I created a friendly environment?
Yes.
It's about self-reflection as well as a leader. Eh?
Absolutely, yeah. And that's about asking yourself all these things. Like I said, identifying all the blockers that you have. We call it a journey of self-discovery. To say, which are the things that I'm doing that are impacting negatively on the culture? Not always looking at other people. There was one story that I had, because we often think it's the other to blame. One of our franchisees at Sorbet came to me one day and said, listen, Ian, I've got a big problem. All of my staff are negative and they're all not working properly. So I said, all of them? She said, yeah, all of them. I said, how many people have you got? She said, 15 in my store. I said, okay, so I think I've got a solution for you. What I want you to do is I want you to run to the toilet. Run to the toilet. Don't walk because this is urgent. Run to the toilet. Go there. Find yourself a mirror. Look carefully into the mirror. Identify the person who is standing there looking into the mirror. raise your hands in a victory salute and say, I have discovered the enemy, and she is me.
That is chilling, Ian. That is chilling. So we have about 11 minutes left. I want to blitz through the questions very fast. Hello, Fubi. Are the webinars recorded? Yes, you can watch the webinar. Just search on the Daily Mavericks YouTube page. There'll be a full recording of this discussion. There was Jan, Munich. Identification of blockers, great identified first step in the transformation journey. So Jan agrees with you. Stephen asks, interesting that you burnt your fingers in the UK, Sorbet. Why did you go for Namibia or Botswana first?
Right. I wish I had. Yeah. In hindsight, we were looking at the neighboring countries to try and grow the business. There was quite a lot of red tape involved, and that caused us a few issues. But I think in hindsight, we should have done that. Definitely. I think the lure of the UK, because it's quite interesting actually why we went to the UK. We had a product, or we still have at Sorbet, a product called Dermalogica, which was our major skincare brand. And I got the opportunity to meet the founders of Dermalogica in America at a conference. And I asked them, I said to them, if you wanted to go and expand Sorbet into a different country, where would you take it? And without hesitation, it was a husband and wife couple. They both said the UK. And I was quite surprised. The UK, I imagined that as a really competitive environment. That would be really difficult. They said, no, there are no branded chains in the whole of the UK. Not one single branded chain like Sorbet. So that, that pricked at my ears. And then, of course, I went out there and had a look at that. And that was the start of the agonizing journey.
You live and you learn.
Yeah.
Jeremy, I wanted to get to this question because it's very important. Jeremy asks, Ian, what is your approach to the equivalence of financial rewards for your employees relative to the profits earned by the company? I ask this because everyone feels they deserve to earn more, but ultimately, one salary is seldom a motivator, but can be a demotivator if perceived as being too low. How much is too much when it comes to financial rewards?
Okay, right. I mean, that is a challenging question and challenges every business leader in one way or another. So, if I look at the Sorbet example, we were fortunate in that we could apply commission structures to our salary. So we gave them a basic or a commission, whichever was the greater. And that really made a big difference at Sorbet, and I think helped towards the inspiration and motivation of those people, because we were getting some of our beauty therapists that could be earning in excess of 40 to 50,000 Rand a month. And traditionally, beauty therapists earn probably 10,000, 12,000 a month. So yes, if you can create an environment where people know that they can improve their income if they work hard and they serve their guests well, then that would work. If you don't have an opportunity for commission-based, then you need to really look at it very carefully, because people need to feel that they are getting what they feel they're worth. Now, that is a perception, obviously. You might think that they're not worth that, and they think they are, and then you need to have a serious conversation about it. But incentivizing people and putting people first is really the secret to success. If you can make sure your people are happy, then there's a much better chance that they will make their customers happy.
So, Joanne, I mean, people still want to draw on your survey days, Ian. So
no problem.
Sorry to just drag you back there. Joanne Hayes asked a question about how do you maintain quality control, service excellence across the board at all of your stores? I guess the question Joanne asked is, when you're getting big and big, managing 200 plus stores, how do you maintain the same quality at each of the 200 stores and the service as well?
Right. So the first thing is obviously in the training and the culture. So you need to have the culture. So the franchisees need to be well trained and understand the culture. So they are the leaders of the stores. But from a point of view of control and compliance and all of that, we had people. In fact, my son Brent, he ran the stores essentially. He looked after all the stores and the franchisees of the Sorbet salons and nail bars. And he had a team of about, I couldn't remember exactly, about 15 regional managers. And they were out there looking at the control and the quality control and the compliance and making sure that the franchisees were doing everything they needed to do. And at the same time, making sure that they were also delivering the service that was required. You need to have a consistency of service. That was the biggest challenge and probably the reason why there are so few beauty salon chains around the world. Sorbet is now the biggest chain in Africa and probably in the top 20 in the world because not many companies have been able to deliver a consistency of service and attitude across a chain of over 200 stores. And that was why there were no chains when we started. I didn't understand why there were no chains, but then I found out was, can you deliver consistency of service in Polokwane and also at the waterfront in Cape Town? The same level of service, and that comes through culture. It's the only way you can do that.
Yeah. Where can I get a copy of Ian's book? Well, there is a link. We left the comments. Just scroll up. There's a link included there to the Daily Maverick shop where you can get a copy of Ian's book. I promise. There's so many lessons and anecdotes that have made me laugh, and also my jaw dropped as well while reading the book. The culture, Ian, lastly. I think the COVID-19 pandemic has really made culture more important. There's a lot of people are anxious right now and uncertain about the future. People are not sure if they're going to have job security going forward. So I would argue that, building a strong culture is important in this climate now more than ever. I'm not sure if you agree with that at all, Ian.
Yeah, 100%, right? Obviously, when you have a pandemic like this and people are forced to work at home, it will have an impact on culture because people are not interacting as much as they would normally do. And those companies that had strong cultures in the first place would have survived that a lot better than those that didn't have a good culture. And so now we have to reframe. We've got to pivot. We've got to change the way we think. And we have to create cultures in terms of this hybrid working environment where people are working half at home and half in the office, et cetera, et cetera. And it's being able to adapt and to anticipate the future. The best business leaders are those that can anticipate the future before it comes. And so now we got to be doing that.
Yeah. Well, Cultureneering is the book. Ian is a cultureneer, right?
Yeah, right. Yes.
Thank you so much, Ian Fuhr. Everybody loved the session. Angela, thank you. This session has been a worthwhile session. This is what Angela says. But Ian, thank you so much. It was really an insightful discussion. And to the more than 120 people who joined us, thank you so much for joining us. Ian, take care.
Thank you very much for being with us today. And thank you, Ray.
Bye-bye. Take care.
Great questions. Yeah. Cheers.